Hello, fellow Megatenists, and welcome to another episode of the Megaten Minute. Back at it again with another video that is more than a minute long. A while ago, my old partner in his podcast, Heretic Mansion, the SMT and Persona 1 and 2 fan, Gnarly, made a video asking the question, did Persona kill SMT? This video is a direct response to that one, as well as a general response to the question, so please watch that one if you haven't already. Strap on your comps and grab some mag. We're gonna answer the question, did Persona kill SMT? So this is a wild question for a number of reasons. I think the first thing we have to do is ask ourselves, what is SMT? As admirable as the work of someone like Fither was, the answer to me is very simple. SMT is the series of games considered to be the main branch in the franchise tree, that franchise being the Megaten franchise, the word that I would use as a broader term for all the games existing that were developed by one of the currently three development teams. Creative Team 1, which is Maniacs, Creative Team 2, that's P Studio, and Creative Team 3, that's Studio Zero. With some exception, as you'll soon find. Some fans use SMT as a general term for the franchise, but I think Megaten is best, but that's just my opinion. Another reason why the question is wild is because it's asking something we already know is answerable quite easily. If we're asking if SMT was killed by Persona, the answer is obviously no, right? We know that SMT 5 is coming and D2 is still getting new content. There's also no statement from ATLUS about stopping the production of future titles from SMT. It's such a wacky idea. I don't know why the question exists, but that's kind of like asking if Disney is killing the Disney princess movies because its superhero movies are their main focus right now. Anyway, great. We know what SMT is, but is it dying? The short answer, no. Here's a timeline for the Japanese initial release dates of mainline games. For this video, we'll also mention other games, and I want you to know that I'm not including all of the phone games, and I'm not including the smaller games like Synchronicity Prologue because I feel like that's a little bit of the minutia. So, what do you see? If you look carefully, there's never really a huge gap, except once, between SMT If and SMT9. Now, what happened between 1994 and 2002? Well, that's where most of the other spin-off branches were created, silly. First, the Majin Tensei game, released in 1994. The last one being Card Summoner, released in 2001. The only spin-offs not created during this gap are Devil Survivor, Tokyo Mirage Sessions, Catherine, and Digital Devil Saga. That is 24 non-mainline titles that were released. But if we were to discount the games not developed by ATLUS, it drops a little bit. It becomes 7 out of the 24 titles. And that's 7 titles developed by ATLUS in the span of 8 years. That's a pretty good amount of titles, I would say. 7 or 24. And why was there a big gap? There's only one real comment I know of that comes from Kaneko about the subject, and he says, this is being in an interview regarding Nocturne, by the way. When the 32-bit consoles, the PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn were released, it took a while for us to create a different kind of Megaten game. One that we hoped would appeal to a wider audience. We had a lot of great ideas that we incorporated into the game and which we developed to the fullest potential at the time. So that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense until you see or hear the last part, which Yamai says. But the PS2 specs were necessary to complete this massive project as we envisioned. For those who don't know, Nocturne was envisioned way back in 1994, around the time that SMT If, came to be. And all these other games that they're talking about, these different games that appeal to a wider audience, or their attempts at appealing to a wider audience, that's the 24 games that are in that gap. So the original gap was full of them experimenting with different styles of games and trying to appeal to a wider audience, but ultimately, specs were a huge hurdle they wanted to overcome, but couldn't during that 8-year gap. I actively tried to find fan sentiment around that time, and obviously 90s internet websites are mostly lost, at least to me, and I had basically just the DDSnet magazines, a set of official magazines released by ATLUS to those who subscribe to the DDSnet, which is a sort of fan club. I also looked at stuff like the comic anthologies and even just fans talking about the old games, and as far as I can see, there really wasn't a huge demand for that next mainline entry right after If, all the way up until the end of that gap. Perhaps diversifying the franchise with all the new entrants really helped to bolster the ranks and create a franchise rather than just the focus of the mainline as a singular identity. And I think that this is going to be my take based on what I've researched. Now, the huge downside to the boom of Megaten content is that it all died down pretty quickly, with most of the spin-off series ceasing to exist by the mid-noughties or, early 2000s, with two exceptions: Persona and Devil Summoner. Tragically, Devil Summoner would also eventually end with a grand total of 4 main entries, but Persona went on to have 14 if you include Strikers, which is going to come sometime someday. This is more than the 11 mainline entries we currently have. What happened? Well, going back to what Kaneko said about Nocturne, ATLUS has been seeking continued success and growth, particularly with widening their audience. With Persona 3, we saw much of that positive attention, though most PS2 era games were fairly well received. And then with Persona 4, we see a better form of attention than any other game in the franchise before it. This is also when we started seeing a few accusations of milking, which sounds negative, but honestly, the metaphor is pretty accurate. They have a winning idea and now they're cashing in. If you look at other spin-offs in the series, they immediately cashed in on these past successes. Devil Children have received 9 titles, 2 manga, and 2 anime series. Devil Summoner received a 2-season live-action adaptation of the first game's general premise, and the Raido games from that series got 2 novels and manga. That being said, this means that, ATLUS has reached company success. They are also continuing to experiment with genres, Strikers being a Musou title, and we have a few other Persona 5 titles that aren't announced but registered, so we know that we'll probably get that sometime soon. Does that mean that ATLUS is killing SMT then? No. Development updates for SMT 5 all hint at a great effort being spent to make this a great new title, which will likely attempt to garner wide appeal. They've also discussed the idea of remaking older SMT games, Nocturne specifically being mentioned. Well, if SMT isn't being killed by Persona, why are we not getting more SMT games? Based on the timeline, we're almost overdue for a new title. The average time between releases, which I did the math, game theory style, and it's 2.9 years. So yes, we're overdue. But with 8 years being the largest gap, I wouldn't be surprised if it takes another 2 years on top of the 3 years we've currently been waiting for the new mainline game. If anything is killing SMT, it's the quest for popularity. If we want more mainline games that long-time mainline fans want, we need ATLUS to evaluate what exactly makes a mainline game and focus on that. But be able to change it in ways that will elevate the game. Funny enough, as someone who loves trivia and data, I find it especially interesting that the people who are most vocal about the franchise dying or Persona killing mainline are usually the people who haven't played most of the mainline entries, don't like mainline entries pre-Nocturne, and or don't play any other games in the franchise. My suggestion, play some of those other entries in the franchise, broaden your perspective on what makes Megaten, and don't worry, SMT isn't dead, so long as we get more games, which we know we are gonna get. After all, Team Maniacs is called the first creative studio. Now, Gnarly also mentioned quite a few things I wanted to touch on. Milking Persona. Like I said, ATLUS focuses on that IP because it sells well. So until we hit franchise fatigue, which I think is happening right now with the sales numbers for that last batch of Persona spinoffs, I don't think it's a bad business move. I don't see it as a problem for fans who don't like those games. Just don't buy them. Decide with your wallet. Remember, this is just one of the creative studios working on most of the spin-offs using pre-existing bones. The dancing games were from the format that Dingo, the studio originally developing Dancing All Night, created. The fighting games for Persona 4 were made with Arc Systems, and PQ is the format that is really actually just Etrian. And the Musou game is made by that company that makes Musou games. Gnarly said also to bring back old spin-offs and create new ones. With how big SMT5 seems to be for ATLUS, I could see this being something directly done following the release of the game. The company has had a huge hiring campaign for years, about 4 years actually, so this is simply a waiting game. It's possible. Next, he mentioned marketing to a Persona audience. The kicker here is that, just like with what I said about SMT fans not really playing most of the games that exist, turns out people like different things. Not everyone who likes Persona 5 is willing to even try out Jack Bros. I mean, most of the people who took my survey prove that SMT fans are unwilling to try most of the games that exist. And if marketing was more prominent, we have to look at the cost versus reward. If 100 flyers are distributed, the average return would be about 10%. So that means 10 out of 100. At what point does the cost then max out the best possible potential for sales? I mean, some of your advertising ideas, Gnarly, just simply don't work. Even Persona 3 and 4 being mentioned and being boosted multiple times with Persona 5 didn't really create much fan interest in Persona 3 and 4. Again, 10% of the people who receive the materials are likely to be persuaded. Lastly, SMT 5 was one of the most in-demand Switch titles for a while in Japan. As long as it comes out sooner rather than later, it will sell great, considering most titles currently for the Switch are ports or first-party stuff. Last idea mentioned was putting SMT in the title. This I hate. I hate it because it's lazy. If I had to describe the most vocal fans of the series in one word, I would say they're lazy. It's so easy to Google, it's easy to research, it's easy to provide solutions to problems. I remember when I first started doing trivia. So this is my story. My sources were nearly entirely from grabbing Wikipedia articles, scrolling down, clicking the links provided, and then verifying that they're accurate. It took about an hour, and I would pump out maybe 30 or 40 trivia posts. You know, the old days, the good old days. I remember starting my collection also. And just by using Google and Google Translate, I was able to find out what merch exists. No, rebranding the franchise has never worked, and I don't think it's necessary. Fans who are interested enough will Google. We don't need more brand confusion. Some other comments I wanted to make about the video. Devil's Survivor is not a successor to Majin Tensei. It's completely different in playstyle, approach to gameplay, storytelling, themes, and it's made by two different companies also. Majin Tensei, Last Bible, Devil Children, Gaiten Tensei. None of these were developed by ATLUS, so a wide variety of the spin-offs we know of are just outsourced material. Heck, even Devil's Survivor is developed primarily by a team acquired by ATLUS, Careersoft, who created Langrisser and a few other titles. And Strange Journey was made by Lung Kars, who did the Etrian games, PQ games, and El Shaddai. So we don't even really know how Lung Kars or Careersoft were absorbed into ATLUS. So for all we know, Careersoft and Lung Kars are working on the new Megaten title as we speak. Gnarly also mentioned Card Summoner as a Devil Children game. It's not. Rande is also not a Majin Tensei game. There's talk about SMT4 being a financial success, but it's more to do with the promotion for buying SMT4 and Fire Emblem Awakening than the game's merit. Getting $30 for buying two games is a big deal. He mentioned Persona 6 might not be here for a while, but it's been in development for as early as 2017, according to one interview, and that means that it could come as early as 2021. Lastly, D2 is proving to be a very profitable game for Sega. Again, not developed by ATLUS, and it's also not typically in the top 50 best-selling mobile games, but it's responsible for a huge boost in sales, as indicated in Sega's last documentation of franchise sales. I'm friends with Gnarly, but as someone who loves the franchise and is playing and constantly replaying these games, exploring ATLUS history and trivia, I just disagree with the sentiment of the video. I'm not trying to send hate, just trying to respectfully disagree. If anything, Persona is killing spin-off creativity, as it's becoming the testing grounds for any new genre venture, and as a result, we're seeing less and less of these guest artists coming and leading a design for future casts, and we're not seeing new stories involving new characters. These are all things that are happening because Persona is the face of these new games. Early in his video, Gnarly also mentioned how hardly anyone talks about anything besides Persona, that there's hardly any YouTubers who are talking about Megaten, or people on Facebook and Facebook groups, or people on Reddit or whatever. But if you follow my channel, if you follow my social media, hey, it's all I do. I have consciously tried to explore all of the franchise and use all my personal interests as a guide, which is why there's a Jack Bros trivia video, 2 Strange Journey trivia videos, and even a Latin text in the original Japanese Megaten logo trivia video before I've done anything regarding Persona 3, 4, and 5 specifically. You could say that I'm being an elitist in that way, but I've just, been chasing my interests. I have tons of ideas for content for those games, but I don't want to enter a saturated market. I really just want to do my own thing. I can't recommend to you guys many other creators, and that's because I basically just focus on what I'm doing. Heck, I even do a podcast where all I do is talk about Megaten news with my friends, and we also do a spoiler cast where we play through these old Megaten games, finish them, write up our little opinions and stuff, and then we just talk about that for a couple hours. So, self-promotion aside, that's it for today's video. Feel free to tell me what you think in the comments. Do you agree with the sentiment that Persona is killing SMT, or were you persuaded by my facts and logic? Anyways, goodbye, fellow Megatenists.